Before I talk about the 9 impossible miracles of evolution, I need to explain a few things first. The first is what I mean by an impossible miracle. Now, we use the word impossible in several different ways. We can use it to describe something that it just isn't going to happen, like the Cubs winning the World Series. Or often we talk about something being physically impossible, like lifting a car over your head or being able to jump over a house. But with regard to evolution, we run into something different. Say I flip a coin. I can get heads, I can get tails. The odds are 50-50 or 1 in 2. But if I flip it again, the odds of getting the same thing is half or 1 in 4. If I try for 3 heads in a row, the odds become 1 in 8. But if I wanted to get, say, 1,000 heads in a row, the calculator I use to just use the word infinity. That would be like painting a grain of sand black, dropping it on a beach anywhere in the world, and asking a blind man to pick it up on the first try. But every time I flip that coin, the odds of getting a heads or tails is always 50-50. So theoretically, it is possible to get heads 1,000 times in a row. Now, evolution does something just like this. Evolution, or science, assumes that everything that exists came about through natural causes. It then tries to figure out what would need to happen then for the world and life as we know it to happen. And then they conclude that it happened that way, as they said it would, because, well, we were here, the world is here, and that's the only way it could have happened. So evolution depends on millions of chance events to take place in a certain order on the order of getting heads 1,000 times in a row. Don't forget, evolution doesn't work with a blank screen. It doesn't get to erase mistakes. They stay there. But again, they assume from the start that all these events happened on their own, without the action of a God. So their account of what happened is considered proven true because there's no other way that they would acknowledge that it did happen. The second matter that I need to mention is that I do something here that evolutionists strongly object to. They make a distinction between the origin of life and the development of life after that. I've considered them both together under the word evolution for 2 reasons. One, I'm not sure there's a consensus on what the minimum criteria are for what constitutes life. So I believe what some scientists call an origin of life issue, another would consider as evolution. And secondly, I believe that any non-scientist would see both issues as really one. Did a guy create and shape all of life, or did it just happen on its own? So I ask any evolutionist to bear with me as I try to look at the bigger picture of how we got to where we are. The first impossible miracle is how life started in the first place. The human body, for example, is made up of things like carbon, water, which is hydrogen and oxygen. Put the 3 together and you get sugar. Nitrogen, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, chlorine, sodium, and magnesium. The simplest life forms would need at least carbon in the water. Now, I don't know how many of you took chemistry in high school, and you get little jars of magnesium and calcium. And so you picture just what we're talking about here. And now carbon is the easiest atom that binds with other atoms. But the carbon molecules found in living cells are unusual, actually unique. They're joined together in ways that they would not join if left to themselves. It's like somebody made them fit. So look at this. So carbon by itself, whenever it interacts with another element or compound or whatever, it binds very quickly, and it forms a very simple bond. But the bonds in living cells are not simple bonds. They are unique. They call left-handed bonds. You couldn't put it like this way. You couldn't put it like that if you really tried. It's a unique structure that just doesn't happen on its own. So frankly, I don't see how life could have formed by itself in the first place. How did carbon and water and whatever else join together to form life? Is life just certain molecular formations? What would animate carbon and water molecules to move and reproduce itself? Well, let's suppose lightning struck a piece of wet dirt and it came to life, the first miracle. There would need to be a second miracle immediately after. Unless this living thing were able to metabolize energy, it would die within seconds. So this lightning would have to strike again immediately and form a metabolic system. Now, you would think a metabolic system would take time to develop, but it doesn't have time. It's got to do this right away, otherwise the thing will die. But then another miracle is needed right after that. Unless this thing could replicate itself, it would disappear from history and life would end. Now we know today this requires things like DNA or RNA, a written code that makes up the blueprint for the current and future life forms. We know that these things are not as simple as flipping a switch. But for the sake of this argument, okay, lightning strikes again and creates DNA. The third impossible miracle. According to the principles of evolution, these would have to evolve through random small changes. But you need a complete reproductive system very, very quickly. Now, the models I've seen I've read of these earliest life forms must have been just like, well, they don't seem like actual living things. They divide like raindrops and acquire bulk by osmosis rather than by assimilation. So, are they really life? That's questionable. The fourth miracle is again DNA. The third miracle is just the fact of having DNA developing so quickly. But think for a minute what DNA actually is. First, it is like an artist's rendering describing what this living thing is going to look like. Then it's like the blueprints of your house, giving the dimensions of every room and location and sizes of all the doors and windows. And thirdly, DNA is like the instruction manual telling you to first insert part A into part B, guiding the entire growth process so everything takes place in the right order at the right time. I mean, doctors can tell you in a fetus exactly just when everything is going to happen, what order, and by a certain number of weeks, something is done. It's like a general contractor who builds the frame of the house before he calls the electricians and plumbers. Now, this is what the DNA does. It has to program all this and put it in order. And this has to be done right at the beginning for this first living thing to reproduce. And all this is supposed to have happened without any outside intervention, strictly on its own. There's another impossible miracle with regard to reproduction. You can go anywhere in the world, and this reproduction system works with any other human being. The existence of races shows how long these different branches of humans develop separately from each other, yet they all develop like they were all from the same playbook. Then the sixth impossible miracle, which to me is the most impossible: sex. See, up to this point, every living thing could reproduce by itself. Now we are asked to believe that these living things, strictly by accident, random mutations, essentially divided themselves into two camps, each developing a complementary reproductive system over maybe 1 million years, a system that was not needed, and which eventually replaced the system of self-reproduction. So which is it? Did all the living things in the world, through random mutations, develop these complementary reproductive systems? Or was it just one line of them, like an Adam and Eve of evolution, two individual organisms that randomly developed these systems? And think of what these systems had to encompass. Not only were these physically complementary systems, they had to divide up the reproductive functions, creating eggs and sperm, which would unite to form the DNA of a new being. Not only that, after these organisms developed these complementary systems over thousands of millions of years, they had to create something that would prompt these separate organisms to join together to form a new life. Like today, we sexual attraction. Why would these two separate organisms with complementary reproductive systems that developed by chance, randomly, of millions of years, Why would they even think to join together to form a new life? So it had to create that as well as just the simple organs of reproduction. The seventh impossible miracle is the human body. The human body is the most complex, sophisticated thing in the world. And we are supposed to believe that this is the result of random chance changes. We're supposed to believe that eyes, brains, and neurological system are all the products of mindless events, which is contrary to everything we know about life. If you went to the moon and found a computer there, or even something as simple as a table and chair, you would say that somebody had been there. You would not say that these things evolved by chance of millions of years. Yet this is the essential premise of evolution. Like finding a Michelangelo painting in the ground and asserting that this formed naturally by nature without any human involvement. I understand the idea of design with regard to the world is not evident to everybody, so I suggest intelligence is the more fitting word. Scientists who have been studying DNA have been paying attention to these mutations. Most mutations are either neutral or harmful. Harmful enough so that the accumulation of them has enabled scientists to determine an upper limit on how long the human species could have been in existence. And frankly, it is a lot shorter time than the time frame commonly accepted by evolutionists. If we existed as a species, as long as evolutionists say, these harmful mutations would have just stopped us a long time ago from existing. Evolution is about the survival of the fittest. Those organisms or attributes that are best suited to their environment survive, while those less do not. Yet evolution says that organisms spend millions of years developing organs and things they didn't need, like eyes, brains, hearts, and lungs. These wouldn't have spontaneously appeared in a generation, but would have taken thousands of generations to gradually form. Yet these would all have been useless features until they were fully developed. So why would these traits have survived until they were? The eighth impossible miracle. As evolution would have it, it would seem to me that humans are a product of chemical reactions, and these would govern the actions of the being. But humans have thoughts. Are thoughts just a response to a chemical reaction? How would my thoughts in response to your thoughts be caused by chemicals? There is no physical interaction. I hear or see words, and my mind chooses how to respond. It's not instinctive, it's deliberate. I can go either way. I can choose how to respond. There is a self that can think and choose a course of action based on reason and not on chemical impulses. And this is separate from any physical processes. So, a human being is not simply the sum of all the chemical parts. There is something more than nature can neither explain nor provide: a soul. The ninth impossible miracle of evolution is that after millions of years and billions of people, animals, well, is there a difference? Everything looks like it's done. You don't evolve hearts and brains and lungs in one generation through one mutation. It takes thousands of mutations over thousands of generations. Yet you look around the world and everything looks finished. You don't see any living thing in the middle of developing a new organ or limb or body part. Evolution is based on the idea that there's nobody overlooking this process. Change happens by accident, and those organisms that live long enough to reproduce what they have. Evolutionists act as if every living thing is living in some small room so that the gene pool keeps mixing evenly. But that's not what we see in the world. You have a life on different continents that would be on separate evolutionary programs. Yet you can go to the remotest parts of the world and find human beings with the exact features, abilities compatible with reproduction. Sure, people have always traveled, but there's not and never has been the kind of interaction that would put everybody in the world on the same page evolutionally. If you want to believe in evolution, go ahead. But please, just don't call it science. Now, it may be science, as science is commonly understood by scientists, but that is not the way everybody else thinks of it. Everybody else thinks that when you say science says something, that means that it has been proven. But you didn't prove evolution, you assumed it. You assumed it because you didn't like the alternative. Either God created the world and life as we know it, or everything came about on its own. You didn't want to think that God created all this, so you chose to believe it all happened on its own. You figured out a step-by-step process that would have achieved the same results, and then you say that this is what happened, because that's the only way it could have happened apart from a God who you reject. So because of these 9 impossible miracles, I cannot accept the idea that all of life and the world as we know it is a result of mindless, random events. There is a God who made all this. Evolution is about a lot more than just trying to explain how it got here. It figures a lot in the question of whether there is a God. Our society has been trying to act like God is unimportant, or just trying to keep everybody busy now so they don't even think to ask the question. But if evolution is based on fact and more on wishing it were true, then people are confronted with the idea that there might really be a God, and that would change everything. When I realized that I believe in God, I realized also that the most important thing in life is to know this God and to serve Him. Everything else is just temporary. Visit my blog at Pelagian Blog. Can you see this? Pelagian Blog 1 blogspot.com. To see my articles on issues that are important to life, your life. Thanks so much. Good night.